We're live and recording. This
All
is
right, cool.
this is going to be a typing session using Socionics Model A. Potentially at the end, we'll talk about DCNH. We'll see if I have a DCNH typing for you. I'm going to be asking a series of of questions. I would like for you to treat them as if they're open-ended. Just kind of like yeah, don't talk to me about like your typology stuff. You know what I mean? Just like stay on the subject. I feel like that
Casual.
biases the typing. Um,
I get you.
and what else was I gonna say? Well, I forgot. Um, this is also not me like telling you your type. This is me giving you my suggestion on what I think you are. So this is so use this as just another data point and understanding yourself. For only you know yourself to the highest degree.
I
Cool. Without further ado, are you ready?
yeah.
Okay. Um, First question: how do you respond to the emotions of others?
Um, I guess it depends on what the emotions are exactly. Like to be honest, I don't really, or it's like it doesn't really phase me to think that like oh someone else is gonna be like emotional. It's more like what I think like okay, does their explanation make sense? Like I don't really feel honestly. I think like the essence of like how other people feel. It's more just like I don't actually care how you feel while you say it. I'm just trying to process whether or not I think that makes sense or not, quote unquote. So it's like not to sound autistic, but that's probably not a factor to me at all.
Okay. So it's just yeah, you're worried if they make sense or not. Okay.
E- yeah, because like I mean, I think you can say something happy, sad, like angry, whatever. I like at the end of it, I'm either just gonna like agree with it or not. So like I don't think the emotions technically matter.
Okay. I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Really.
Yeah. Let's move on.
What? All right, all right.
What were we gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna be like, what? Why? What do most people usually say?
Oh,
I don't know
some
if that matters too much.
some people express regret about not being emotional enough. Others say it's pretty easy. Other people say it depends on how close they are to me. And you're like, does it make sense? Yes or no?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not even like whether it's about like me being logical or it's just I'm just like, yeah, it's just like, do I agree with it or not, emotionally, logically, or otherwise?
Okay.
You know?
Can you tell me about any reoccurring problems you've been having in your life?
Reoccurring problems. I don't know about reoccurring problems, but I guess it's more so just like I don't know if it counts, but I guess like what about like I guess the like questions that people ask themselves that they never really get an answer for on the daily, does that count?
I'm sorry, could you reiterate that? I kind of like my brain drifted for a
Like
second.
oh, I'm saying I don't know if it counts, but like do the questions that I guess I would imagine people ask themselves on the daily and don't really get like any satisfying answers for, can those count as like reoccurring problems, quote unquote?
So you're saying like you're saying like questions that can't be answered.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Because I think like for me, it's just like it's not really problems in my life because I guess like anything can be quote unquote fixed unless it's like super bad. Like I don't know, unless you have like really really awful cancer or something like that. I don't know, but it's just like I think like I can get over like most things. I can be mildly irritated at most, but I guess like if something has to be, because like the keyword here was like reoccurring problems, I guess it just comes from like questions. I guess like because like I mean, I already accepted meaninglessness in a way, but I guess it's almost like I guess because you're thrown into this world with whatever like sort of like awareness at all, then sometimes even though it's like I've come to terms with accepting that like oh like there's like nothing to this world, it's just it is what it is, nothing more, nothing less. But like there's like paradoxical questions of like oh why live even though you're just gonna die like not like I'm not saying I'm suicidal or I have like an ideation to be like dead or something like that, but I think it's just like I I guess the cognitive dissonance that comes with like being a human, it's not necessarily a problem, but I guess sometimes it's just like funny or like if there has to be a problem, I guess it's like the closest thing like I would say because like I guess continuing to exist, even being aware that it's all going to end is like ultimately absurd when you think about it, or at least when I think about it.
Wow.
So yeah,
Full on existential crisis. All right.
like it can come and go. I guess like positive or negative. It's like you can have the existential crisis, or at least like I think that's like, oh wow, this shit's absurd. So it's just like a big fucking joke, and it's like funny. And I guess like sometimes like you just feel nothing, and you can just and it feels like you can just like lay there for like an eternity. So I guess like even with that, it just goes up and down.
Gotcha. No, I totally feel that, man. I'm like constantly on the precipice of like a new crisis. It always feels like, it's like it's just crazy, like reality is like so visceral. It's so
Yeah,
powerful, so
yeah.
crazy,
And
and
it's like what form of like philosophy or rationalization am I going to use to cope for now until I guess find something else, you know?
yeah. I always just use like mindfulness. That it's like it's all about like the level and state of functioning, rather
Mhm.
than the solution of like, I guess meaning. I guess when you need to recontextualize things, but I feel like there's like innate desires and goals that you have, and there's like nothing left but to press forward, to seek those things out that you want. I mean, I guess it's part of the reason why I'm talking to you right now, isn't it? That it's in part this like little scientific project that I got going is how I how I stave off the madness.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's like, it's like I look at my life and I'm just like, okay, if I knock this domino down, maybe something really, really awful might happen or something like really, really great. I don't know. It's like maybe it's like I would say to like, I don't know, just like live this life. It's almost like pulling like the crank on like a slot machine. You can either get something like really, really good or like something like really really awful might happen and then like you lose all your money. It's all up to this like random chance. Like I don't even know if I want to say probability or like coincidence because like can I say random probability? I don't know if that even makes sense. Yeah. I don't know. So I think like to like live is to just like I don't know, you're just like opening random boxes and for all you know there's like a fucking like monkey with rabies in there ready to like claw you out. But it's like I guess the force of being forced to live, I guess like in terms of like survival instinct, you'll go for it anyway, regardless of not knowing. I don't know.
Yeah, reminds me of this mini game in Mario Party 5. Random memory. I mean, but of course I just kind of played it with some people that I was hanging out with the other day. And it's like you gotta
Yeah.
like get the shy guys, but sometimes you open
Mhm.
it and it like depends on the vibration. You can just get a bob bomb and it just blows up in your face,
Mhm.
and it just reminds me of that. You gotta
Uh,
you gotta get enough. You gotta get enough shy guys to be successful. But sometimes it just all blows
mhm.
up, and sometimes somebody beats you to it. So
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately,
what a fucking silly example. Oh
I
man.
mean, life does feel like a video game. I get it. Like, I don't know, call it a video game, call it a simulation. It's just random. Like, oh, power ups or not. I guess ultimately, like, such is life.
C'est la vie. Yeah. I remember I was talking to my LIE friend, and it was so funny. He was like, he like refers to it as like different like statistics and like all and like probabilities, and so it's all like board game like
Mhm.
comparisons, and it's like and it's like I just got like +5 health after doing that and shit, and it's so funny because like it's like really funny to listen to him talk that way. Like, it's kind of
Mhm.
accurate. It's kind of accurate that that's actually what's just going on. We're just getting all sorts of like nerfs and buffs and shit just going around, and the shit's just changing and all that. And you wanna get your buffs up so high that life is easier.
Mhm.
And I think that's like ultimately like my end goal, more so than anything else, is just practice enough like art, science, and language and this shit in order to like be good
Mhm.
at life.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's just the more info, the better. Hopefully, the more it hopefully makes more sense, even if you still find a fuck ton of questions along the way.
Yeah. We've really kind of got off track on this one. It was kind of an interesting conversation. Let's move on to the next here.
All right, all right.
Right. Um, what are your hopes, dreams, and aspirations?
Oh God, this is a difficult question to answer. Well, it's not really difficult, I guess. I guess like I'm just aware that like I have an answer for this, answer, whatever. That like I feel like a lot of people typically wouldn't expect because like I don't know, when I think of like my life, a lot of people might just say, "Oh, here's another typical slacker." I don't know, or like someone lazy, or like somebody that's like directionless, quote unquote. And because like I know that like a lot of people typically have the idea that like you have to have like some sort of like agenda, some sort of like goal, some sort of aspiration or like hope to go through to I guess I don't know, like push forward. But it's like if I've consistently pushed my life forward, not really caring about much, and like in a way, a goal aspiration never really like served me in a way, maybe perhaps that like I guess it does for like other people. And I don't know, there might come a time where okay, I might have to really put myself out there, I guess, because there won't be I guess anything to like fall back on hypothetically. But it's like I don't know, like but it's like when I think about like goals and shit, they always feel like they're way too trapping for me. Even though it's like I know why people might have a goal or might have like a oh I want to go on this like path because like I want to do this, I want to like um I guess feel a sense of security, but it's like I have like mixed feelings, I guess, when it comes to like the idea of like goals and like aspirations because it's like okay, I understand why people want to know the things that they're gonna do or the things that they like, plan or like hope to like achieve, I guess. But then it's like at the same time, I'm just like, when I think about it too much, I always feel like that's like closing. That's like, okay, like if I decide on this goal or like that goal, it's like I have to like traject myself into that like specific lane and like say goodbye to things. And it's like sometimes I don't mind leaving things up to chance. So like, what am I gonna do in let's say a decade from now, assuming I'm still alive? Hopefully I don't die in like a terrible accident. It's like
Knock on wood.
it's like it's like I feel like I don't have to know because I think like when I live my life, if there's something I have to take care of like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I can be I can try to prepare as much as I want like right now, but I can't fix an issue that's quote unquote hypothetically 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I feel a bit relaxed about it, honestly, because like you know I mean, I don't know, maybe this does sound bad to like a lot of people, but to me it's just like unless the problem isn't actually like exploding in your face, I think it could be a cope, I don't know, but like I'm just saying that like it's like I feel like I don't need to worry about something unless it actually like explodes in your face because it's like okay, fixing one problem just leads to like another problem. So I think like we shouldn't give uh power to these things unless we know that they're actually going to like domineer because I think like yeah that's what people say it's like oh what are you going to do when so and so's dead, what are you going to do when okay, and it's like like it's just you hypothetically and I'm just like I don't know, I'm not supposed to know because it's like I like I want to live here right now where I know that things are like more or less okay and I shouldn't be stranded in the past and I shouldn't be cornered by like what might happen. So I think like I feel like I said a whole lot of nothing just to basically say I don't know, but like I guess if that's what it sounds like, then I guess I would just use those three words like I don't know, I guess, but I think I'll know when I'm supposed to know.
Cool. I think it's actually a pretty sufficient answer. Um, it's a very philosophic tone. I think we're gonna move on so that my brain doesn't like collapse from too much information.
Sorry.
Hey, don't worry about it, man. You're elected the dictator of your home country for 6 months to solve its problems. What do you do?
Um for like what specific issue, I guess.
Well, it's your home country. What issues is your home country going through?
Okay, is this one of those like situations where like if I back out I'll get like thrown in prison or something where it's like, oh, you don't want to serve, we'll put you in jail, prison, whatever sort of thing? Because like I mean, because like idealistically I don't want to be given that burden of actually solving an entire nation's like issues, quote unquote, or at least not on the spot anyway. I mean, if I ever become a politician, then all right. But it's just like I don't know. It's like if they just chose someone at random, which that's what it kind of sounds like, at least how in terms of how I interpret that. Then it's just like,
Well, you're elected, so somebody obviously saw something in you.
mm, I was elected, so I ran. Then hypothetically,
Yeah,
okay, so like nobody just decided, or like the government just didn't decide, like okay, we're electing you, and suddenly you have to do this now.
yeah. And see, it doesn't matter since the country's hypothetical. I mean, some people choose to steer it in the ground for shits and giggles.
Um, I think okay, honestly, I think this might be just a simplistic answer. I feel like maybe I'm like running away from like answering it, but I think like I would say I would only do, I guess, what's within my control, and obviously what I think is like worthy to like fix. Because like I know that because like okay, especially since like if we're talking about like politics, elections, whatever, this and that, there must have been a lot of people that also didn't vote for me hypothetically, or people who wouldn't want someone like me, I guess, running the shit or like something like that. So I think like I'm gonna do, yes, I think like this just applies for me, but I'm gonna do what I think is right, or I guess like what makes sense while I make like those decisions. But if I'm just being like upfront, I'm not gonna have the expectation that like it'll actually satisfy everybody. So like if there's a specific issue, then I think I'll give my answer for what I think is like a good specific plan, or like whatever. But it's like I'll just maintain it as long as I can maintain my position. And if hypothetically I get exiled by someone who doesn't like me, or I get like thrown out because they don't think I'm good, then like I guess I'm not going to care too much about it, because I'm just going to say, okay, you guys gave me the chance, so technically you brought it upon yourselves. Whatever you thought, or whatever like hope that you saw in me to be able to like restore things, or like whatever and like whatnot. So I think like if I'm being honest about it, I don't think it's actually so much so whatever responsibilities I did to hypothetically fix things, but it's also the people that put me there in the first place. So if they're upset, technically they can be upset at me, but they also technically made themselves upset. So technically, the way I see it, I think we're all to blame here if something doesn't work out. But if it does, then okay, cool, happy accident, I guess, technically.
Okay. So have you thought about anything that you would actually do? We can move on if you want to.
um no, not in particular.
Gotcha. Moving on. How do you form your moral values?
God, this is a difficult one, because if I'm being honest, I don't think I actually have any strong moral values, or at least like I'm not trying to say that like nothing bothers me, or like nothing can't bother me, but I'm just like I don't know. I think it's just like a random like influence in the brain, because I think it's like because like when you consider like okay, psychopaths, sociopaths, whatever the correct term is supposed to be, I think technically it's called antisocial personality disorder, for example, like things like that. People, excuse me, hypothetically attribute like certain individuals, so I guess like not having many morals, or at least like are willing to break morals, hence they're like anti-social, and they do things that are like I guess not accepted by society, and yeah, due to like these like brain differences, I guess. So like I don't know, because I think that like if any of us could have hypothetically been born that way, like if you're not a psychopath, I think that was just by random chance that you weren't. And if hypothetically you were a psychopath, it also was just by like random chance that like you were. So I think it's like morals, I think, come from like biological like manipulation, because like if like if you had the brain hypothetically to not care that okay, somebody's in pain, somebody's like in need of help, and you can just watch them and feel nothing and like blank and stuff, then it's like technically it's not even your fault, at least from like that point of view. Or like if you do care, and I'm not trying to side with the psychopaths hypothetically, but it's like if you do care, that's not technically your fault either, because like okay, your brain's like pressuring you to feel all this like negativity because like oh, I don't like seeing that, I don't like seeing that somebody's like hurt or something like that. So I think like because morals tend to be like a very like emotional sort of like topic, at least like where I'm coming from, I don't think I can justify it, because I think like a lot of it is like very very like fallacious, because I think that like most people do have the same morals. Like if you live in like one particular society, the majority agreed that like oh, this is wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong. So most people don't even have to question their like ethics, because like they basically have like the cheerleader mentality where oh, everybody here for the most part thinks that this is not okay, so like I'm on the winning team, quote unquote. And I feel like a lot of people don't really acknowledge that, but like technically that like is the truth. So when it comes to like where I'm forming my moral values, it's like I guess the closest most consistent thing I can only appeal to is basically like my own like biology, my own like bias technically, to like where you can put it. But I guess it's like I don't know, when it comes to the whole like nature versus nurture thing, I guess it would ultimately also be society in a way, because it's like we know that hypothetically if we get caught doing certain things, we might go to prison or we might get like in trouble for it. But it's like hypothetically, like I don't know, I can admit this, like if there weren't any consequences to me right now, hypothetically going into a random store and just like taking a candy bar and like not paying for it, it's like like I'd willingly do that, for example. But it's like I won't, because I'm just like I don't feel the need to be obligated to like, oh, okay, I'm gonna sneak into a store and I'm gonna steal some candy. I'm gonna do it like so conspicuously and I can like get away with it. It's like I don't care to do that, because like I don't want to get like I don't know, I guess like the whole of society. Well, it's not really the whole society, but like like the people that are supposed to be in charge of like maintaining this shit, like I don't really care. So it's like I don't know. To me, it paints like a bigger picture, because like how much do we know we actually hold these values versus like not being like forced to like enforce it, because like you can watch something like The Purge or whatever, and people have like speculations where it's like what would we do if like there weren't any consequences, like all crime was like legal for like a day. And I think like because we mostly live in a society where yes, majority of the people will follow the rules, they'll probably say something along the lines of like oh, even if that wasn't like enforced, I would still not kill, not do this. And it's like, I'm not saying that's necessarily like false, but like all I'm trying to say though is that like you don't actually know, because like the reason you follow these rules, at least from like an environmental, like like social point of view, is that like they've been conditioned onto you like your whole life basically. You've known since like a very young age that you're taught not to do this, you're taught not to like do that. So it's like when we consider these things, people still might say, oh, we'll still know that like this is the right thing to do. But I think it's like hypothetically, if there was something more sinister in people, they probably don't want to tap into that, because the morals, at least from like a societal collective, are meant to like hold human beings together. So it's like it could easily be built on a house of cards, and I'm not saying that I don't see why this house of cards like exists, but it's like at least from a explanatory point of view, at least from a very very like justified point of view, I don't really see how I can do that, to be honest.
Okay. Next
Yeah.
question. How do you process your own emotions?
Hmm. I feel like I'm gonna give a really, really I guess I don't want to say controversial, but it almost sounds contradictory. But I think I would say that like technically I don't, because I feel like in a way you don't technically have to process your emotions, because I think like people have like the misconception. I'm not saying that like it's always wrong, but I think like all the time they think like, oh, you need to tap into yourself. You need to like feel, I guess, like why something's hurting you. And like sometimes I think that like not all feelings are necessarily helpful. Because like for example, I don't know, I'll just use like a simplistic like like comparison for it, or like something. It's like let's say somebody does like a school shooting or does something like really, really like terrible. They must have been like really, really involved like in their emotions. And I know someone like might say, oh well, they could have just like like expressed it in like a better way. They don't always like they didn't have to like go that far to, let's say, be homicidal and like kill a whole bunch of like people. But I think like in a way, isn't that basically suppressing those feelings as well, technically? Because like if somebody, let's say, I guess, felt so wronged by society, their peers or something, that like they want to take a gun and like kill people, that like those are the emotions that like led up to that. They're like, oh, they're so angry, they feel mistreated, they feel this and this and that. So I think like if society were to like be honest with themselves, they don't think all feelings are actually quote unquote like valid. Because like if you tell somebody to like channel, I guess, like their you know feelings of hatred, feelings of anger into like something like quote unquote like more healthy, I would actually argue that that is contradictory to those feelings of, I guess, like feeling angry, because or like intense anger where there's like bitterness and like hatred and like frustration. Because I think if you feel such emotions that are so like intense, I don't think you care, to be fair. Because anger hypothetically can come with like a sense of like vengeance, even like a sense of like sadism, because like, oh, I feel like I've been so wrong, like suddenly you have to pay now, quote unquote. So I think if people really did act on like the emotions that they had like all the time, then yes, we would not have like a civilized society, because people would be fighting like like constantly, and like we already do. So I think yeah, of course it is. It's like a very like complicated subject in terms of like how you should like deal with your feelings, or like how you should like process your feelings. But I think it's like a lot of society excuse me, God, a lot of society doesn't even want to admit that, despite this narrative that like they push, they don't see all feelings as beneficial, because take into account you you can't actually take into account every single person's feelings, because whatever someone wants is going to contradict with like somebody else. So like in actuality, people think it's fine to, I guess, deal or process their own feelings or somebody else's feelings, as long as it like suits their narrative. Because I know there's somebody that doesn't care about my feelings, and there probably is also someone else that whose feelings that like I don't actually care for. So whether or not you process your feelings or not, the only thing that gets in the way is if any of these feelings make you go out of your way to contradict someone else's agenda. So technically, I would even argue that majority of society, majority of people could not care less about how you actually process or like not process your feelings. So like with that, I don't even know if I have to process my own feelings, but the only thing I know is that as long as my feelings aren't getting me into trouble with, I guess, I don't know, myself or someone else or like something like that, then I don't think it matters if I actually process them or not. Like whether I do or don't is just a byproduct of whatever.
Gotcha. And then there's me, on the contrary, who feels like success is being in unison with your entire state, and then you must process those emotions, or else they'll unconsciously guide you. So I guess different strokes for different folks. Um, we're gonna go ahead and move on for the sake of brevity here.
All right.
Are you open to new ideas?
Um Yeah, I would like to think so. At least like hearing them. I think like some people have a misinterpretation that being open to new ideas, like, means that you actually have to like agree with them. And technically that's not even true, because like I've gotten to like plenty of like debates and like arguments with people, and obviously that means, oh, differing points of views like clashing and like contradicting each other. I would like to think that like yes, I am open-minded. I'm like willing to hear you out, but like if it simply just does not make sense to me, like I try to like wrap around, oh, why you think this way, why you feel this way, and like I still don't get it. I would argue that technically, no, it doesn't mean I'm closed-minded just because I can't see where you're coming from. Like I attempted to hear what you were saying. I attempted to like rationalize or empathize, whatever the proper context here would be. And if I simply don't get it, then like yeah, I like simply don't get it because like I can't force myself. Or I would imagine like a lot of people can't force themselves to believe in like something they don't, or like I would have to like manipulate and gaslight myself like really hard, and of course I'm tied into my own bias as much as like anyone else is. So I guess depending on your interpretation of what it means to be open to new ideas, open-minded, this and that, you might still think that I'm not, but I at least, well yeah, like as an axiomatic default, at least within my definition, yes, I do believe I'm open-minded.
Okay, excellent. We'll move on here. Do you like to travel?
um Yes and no. I don't feel like it's necessary. I can see why it appeals to like a lot of people because like a lot of people often say that like, oh, I want to see new countries, I want to like visit new places, and it's like, yeah, there are cool things. Like let's say hypothetically, across a different continent, across to like a different state, whatever, and like all that kind of things. And it's like, yeah, if you want to do it, you really have to put in the like effort to let's say save enough money to travel, do this and this and that. And it's like yeah, I'm sure it is cool, but I think it's just like I don't know, because like ultimately I'm gonna spend the majority of my life in like one location anyway, or I believe so anyway. Like maybe some people disagree, but it's just like I don't know. You know, you can see as many places as you want, but then like eventually, like the whole point of I think or at least like how it's built upon is that like if you're going to travel you're supposed to be leaving to a place where that's like completely different, so it's not like you're going to plan to quote unquote like move there. So I don't know, some people do, but like that's not the concept I'm talking about, where it's like okay, if it's like simply just the act of like traveling itself, I can see a new place, but then like ultimately in a way if a long time passes where like you know I'm back home wherever that is at like that point in time, then like I don't know. It feels no different than I don't know if like fever dream would be like the right context here. It doesn't necessarily mean that like I regret, I guess, like seeing a new place, but I think it's like I don't see it as something that like needs to quote unquote happen. It was like yeah, that was cool, but then at some point it's like okay, well, like what else is new? Or it's like okay, I'll be honest. Or it's like I don't like the physical effects that come with traveling. Like I guess like let's just say jet lag, whatever. Like I'm sure not a lot of people like do, but it's like I don't know, sometimes I wonder if like is that like worth keeping up consistently just to like see like a lot of places. And it's like yeah, there are like you know plenty of places that are cool to like visit, but it's like yeah, I don't know if I'm like I know I'm able bodied, but I'm saying that like I don't know if I have the will to do that like consistently like some people aspire to. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right, we'll move on. Interesting, interesting. How do you handle conflict with others?
um I guess it depends. I think like a lot of times I'm actually fine with just agreeing to disagree. I think like especially if maybe if it is a conflict in terms of like I guess like moral differences, a lot of people can't like let things go. And I guess like okay, they're entitled to hypothetically, you know, feel that way because like, you know, it's their perspective. But like technically I'm also entitled to also like not care. So I think like as long as you're not gonna go like let's say ape shit and want to like kill me over it, I think like honestly you can feel whatever it is you want to feel about me. You can think I'm worse than the worst person you know. You can think I'm worse than, let's say, Hitler or something like that. Like, if you can still stay out of my way, then I think, like, yeah, that's fine. Because I would say that, like, I don't need every single person to like me, or like, I've accepted realistically that not everyone will like me. Because, like, kind of like what I've already said, like, a lot of times I think where it's like, yeah, so many people will contradict each other just as a default with, you know, what they think, what they feel, like, whatever. So, I think if like let's say if it's hypothetically like a conflict with like a friend, if they're willing to get over it, then so will I as well. If they, if they can't look at me the same anymore because of like, I don't know, like something that they think I did is like super wrong, then, they're free to also like walk away because like I think not everyone is supposed to be with you down the line. And, if they're not, then it's like you have to face the reality of like the situation and be like, oh, like if it were like a puzzle, they're no longer a piece that like technically fits. So like to handle conflict, I think people take themselves like way too seriously sometimes. Like sometimes you don't have to take like actually handle conflict. I'm just like if you guys can like walk away from each other, yeah, that's fine. Like sometimes I think like it's a bit immature when people have to think that like, oh, because we disagreed on like this, or like they don't think the same way as me, and like in this like particular thing, let's say, like, you know if there's anything like that. I guess like I'm just saying like in akin to like okay, like if I'm just being like upfront about it, I don't feel the need to like act like a high schooler. Like who cares if so and so had a conflict with like so and so? It's like like what? Like are you still in high school? Like are you walking down the halls like scooping out for like some like interesting sort of like gossip? It's just like okay, we disagree. We can either like move past it because like I don't have to change your mind, you don't have to change my mind, but like if not, then it's just like okay, we'll go our separate ways. And I think that ought to be fine. Yeah.
Okay. Are you cautious?
Um, yeah, as cautious as I need to be, I think. I'm generally not that trusting of like a whole lot of like other people. Well, I mean, I don't want to say I'm like not trusting, but I think it's just like because I don't typically care to like be involved in like other people's like affairs anyway. So I don't really get why somebody would want to like poke their nose around like mine as well, just as like a default. So I think like sometimes, if I'm being honest, like an overly friendly person could perhaps come off to me as like maybe fake. Well, maybe they're not, or at least like I'll have like a multitude of like ambiguity and impressions towards somebody if like they're willing to get like really close right away. Because like maybe they don't even have like malicious or like ill intent, but like it can still speak a lot about a person. Like maybe like oh, they're super insecure and they need somebody to like latch onto them. And I would argue that can be just as bad as somebody that like technically has it out for you, wants to like take advantage of you, this and that. So I think like I'm cautious in the regard that like I just don't want to, I guess, be burdened by other people. Like I don't feel like I'm scared of like other people like in particular, but I don't necessarily feel the need to be so interconnected with them. So I think like not on an like anxiety level of like oh I must constantly like have like my borders up. I think like I'm actually skillfully good at just like mechanically automatically like not like letting people in because like they like I think will probably sense that like I am a brick wall and it can only go down unless I personally do it myself. So I think like I'm cautious in that regard, or at least like I don't even want to use the word cautious. I would say more so that like I'm just very like selective is more of the word. But unless somebody interprets that as cautious, then okay then.
Gotcha. We'll move on here. What is truth to you?
What is truth to me? I guess just logical consistency. And I guess I'm gonna be like, okay, what is logical consistency then? Then I guess it would ultimately just be like I guess puzzles like fitting together. But I think like technically there is no truth. But I guess you could also ask the question, is that a truth then? Because I think it's like a from an epistemological like nihilistic point of view. I think that if you think about something hard enough, you can make yourself believe anything, and you can technically make yourself not believe anything as well. Which is I know is paradoxical and like completely like contradictory, but it's like I think trying to determine what is adequate epistemology is like trying to work around saying oh I only know that I know nothing. So it's like it makes an assertion while also like debunks itself like at the same time, because I think it's like asking why there's a why already presupposes that there is a definition for a why to ask why. And then you can be like, okay, hold up, what definition of why are you using to ask why there's a why? And then it kind of just collapses on you and it kind of just like breaks. So I think like what people accept as truth, or I guess ultimately what I accept as like truth as well, is just like whatever I guess axiomatic things seem the most like consistent, like oh the sun's probably going to come up like the next day like it did before, because I'm just like I only have like a frame of inference, perhaps maybe from like the past to show that like oh this and this can happen, but it's like I think you can also like fall into like philosophical traps where it's just like oh, okay, even if let's say hypothetically that happened to so and so and so. I mean like scientists predict right that like the sun might explode and just like kill all life on Earth. Like who's to say that won't be tomorrow? Okay, I don't know the research that well, quote unquote, but it's just like it's like you expect a pattern, and if that pattern has worked for you for like the longest, then it establishes, I guess, comfort, familiarity, because like I think people try to use truth as a way to feel like a security within themselves, or at least maybe that's what I'm trying to say, or like that's like what I'm like trying to do. But I think it's like I don't know, because like it doesn't necessarily work. I guess like when you keep thinking about it from like a philosophical like aspect, because I think like I can be pretty skeptical, or it's kind of weird because like there's like I think like there's a paradox within myself where it's like I can feel or think that something strongly is true or that it's false, but like there's a annoying voice at the back of my head, almost like a pop-up at least, that's still trying to say oh what if that's wrong, what if that's wrong. And it's like even if I entertain it and try to convince myself within that like new perspective, another voice might come and be like oh what if that voice is wrong, and it kind of just like runs into a circle. So I think like when I think about like truth too long, analysis paralysis is basically like all there is. So I think like what I think is truth, or what I think like other people think is truth, is like the most like the if you can show that it has like a strong security blanket, then people will latch to it, whether you're doing that to yourself or whether you're doing that to like other people. So it's like so whatever greatest form of rationalized manipulation you can do towards yourself and anyone else, that you will label such as truth, probably. Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically that it's like personal, subjective.
Sure. For like biased, like limited human point of view, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll move on. Would you consider yourself to be a consistent person?
Um, Probably not, but at least like I try to be. Well, the only reason I said probably not is because like when you said that, it reminded me of like the saying that like the only constant is excuse me, is change. The only constant is change. So maybe people would like to think that they're like pretty much consistent, but like hypothetically, if there's like a better con man, and I'm gonna say con man even in the context of like an ideology, a religion, way of life, a cult, like this and this and that, if it can suck you in, then like yeah, I'm sure you're likely to that, because like humans, at least biologically, are designed for security, and I guess like I just mean that in the sense of like survival instincts. Like yeah, I know people can feel suicidal and kill themselves, but even then, I still know that like it's still technically wired in for you to live, because it's like it's not like I would imagine anyone can hold their breath to death, or it's like when a lot of people kill themselves, there can hypothetically be hesitation, feelings of like anxiety. So I think in terms of like being consistent, I believe people are consistent in their comforts up until maybe they find something that like they believe is more comforting, and they'll try to be like as consistent with that as it is. But like if that hypothetically shambles, because like it's built on like a house of cards, they just like latch onto like something. So like maybe it's not like consistency, but it's like consistent security is what I, or like other people, if we're being honest with ourselves, are like all technically trying to do. So if you define consistency in like a very specific way, I believe anyone can be consistent. I can be consistent. But if you define it in also like another way, then like yeah, you can't. Because like at some point, at what point does it just become like, I guess, like why am I even doing this? Like, I guess, like, why, like, because like what if I ask myself, or what if I ask you, that it's like, okay, if I'm not consistent, then can I be consistently inconsistent? And then I guess a lot of people would be like, what is the point in entertaining that? Or like it's because, like, I guess a lot of people would be no different than like, okay, why do I have to have passion in my life? Why can't I be passionate about being dispassionate and, like, hating everything, or like being cynical about everything? And yeah, it all just like blurs out. So I think, like, what consistency is, it can be anything that you want, because underneath the structure of everything is just true hollowness, technically.
Dark, bro. Existential. And very interesting. Um, we're gonna keep it moving here because we're already at 45 minutes. Otherwise, I'd talk a little bit more, man, but I think it's a little
Yeah.
late in the day. I mean, I kind of like to give you a little bit more feedback, but do you feel
Oh,
like that
okay.
this is not enough feedback?
No, no, you say as much as you want. Like, it's all good.
Yeah.
I probably said like a whole bunch of things that were like unnecessary. 'Cause I don't know, 'cause it's like, I don't know. I just want to be precise. I mean, that's not even the word. I just want to be, I just want to say whatever I can say, like, in the most like sufficient sort of way possible. So it's almost like, maybe it's like I'm soundboarding you technically in a way, so it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm gonna take all this information down and I'm writing some of it out, but I'm recording everything, of course. Um, yeah, I think we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next.
All right.
Do you think of the outcome when making decisions?
Do I think of the outcome? Yes and no. Like, if that can like make sense, because I think it's like, I don't know how much of what I'm gonna do is about the outcome, or also, or not just the like experience itself. Because I think, like, majority of things that, like, I can organize it, like, if I were to try hypothetically, but it's like, is there supposed to be a proper outcome to, like, I don't know, let's say like watching TV? And I guess, like, you could say something like, oh yeah, enjoy the movie, enjoy the show, but it's like, depending on, like, because I don't, because like when you say like the outcome of something, I guess to a lot of people that's probably something like more serious, but I don't necessarily believe that anything I do has to be serious. So I think, like, it's probably more so just the like experience, like, of it. But I guess, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if this is like a silly example, but I think like a good combination of that is probably like food or something. It's like, it would be nice to enjoy the food that I'm eating, so, like, that goes for, like, the good like experience of it. But like, also, the outcome is also like, oh, I need the nutrients, I need the sustenance, because I need to eat to survive, and like stuff like that. So I guess, like, it probably just depends on like whatever like I'm doing, but I think like it's a blurred line, because obviously to execute something you have to experience it, and like obviously with like the dominoes that you stack and knock over, they create like a specific result, one that you may have wanted, or an unexpected result that like you didn't expect, like, hypothetically. So it's like, I don't know if it's so straightforward, but it's like, I would like to think I consider it all. So I still want to say yes in a way, because like it can be like formed in like a certain path. I don't necessarily believe that my actions are just impulsive. So I would hope so. Yeah, that I think of outcomes. Yeah.
Just a second. That last thing that you said was interesting, and I wanted to write it down.
Sorry.
How do you handle criticism?
Um, how do I handle it? Like in the same way, I guess, in terms of like conflict and like a whole lot of other things, people's emotions. I think it's ultimately like, whether I think like the criticism is valid or not. Like, some people can say something is unfounded criticism, and some people might fire back with like, no, this is actually very constructive criticism. But I guess, like, if we're talking about like me specifically, if I think the criticism holds like a lot of like merit, then I think like yes, I want to think that it is worthy of being like incorporated into my ideology, and I'll think or do or look at things like very differently. But I think like if I'm just being honest and like if we're all being like honest with ourselves, people are going to be like, oh, he's close-minded, he's stubborn. But I think if you were to just be honest, it's like if you take criticism and it doesn't make sense to you, you're probably just going to dismiss it in the trash along with like everything else because like if I can't reason whatever I think you believe is a decent criticism towards me, then okay, if I'm being honest, then like you essentially gave me nothing. It's not going to change like anything about my life because it doesn't add up. And it's like it's not necessarily about me. I think like everyone like is like this to like a certain extent because like you have no use for things obviously that you see are not you know useful. So handling criticism, I feel like that I think is like pointless. It's like it's not like I don't even have to handle it. I just don't care about it if it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, that was some good examples. We'll move on. Do you ever make decisions on the basis of the affect of others? Examples of this can include facial expression, tone of voice, or body language.
I mean, yeah, sure. I've been sarcastic. I'm sure like a lot of people have, or you can hear the frustration in my voice, the annoyance, or like something, or like I don't know, not always necessarily to like prove like a point of like other people, but it's like yeah, I think I can be pretty expressive because like or at least like on a physical level maybe because I've been told by like some people that like my facial expressions are actually very funny, like they're exaggerated or like something like that. It's like it's not like I keep that in mind to do. It's like oh, okay, I'm gonna make like I don't know a funny face to like make everyone else like laugh or something. But like that's also happened. So yeah, I don't know because like I don't necessarily think about how I look from like a third person point of view, which I'm gonna assume that question also kind of comes is also sort of like leaning towards because like I've been told, for example, that like the way I run looks kind of funny, which is I guess difficult for me to like interpret because it's like I would have to see footage of myself running to like actually sort of like analyze that. Or it's like people have told me like how are you comfortable in that position, and I'm just like well I am. Obviously if I wasn't then because it's more like the question they're asking how am I comfortable with that position is obviously more of like a like that doesn't make sense like well like wouldn't you be like like yeah uncomfortable like that, and I'm just like that's kind of stupid, no offense, because like obviously if I was then you wouldn't see me in whatever frame that you're looking at me in because obviously I can't see it from like a third person perspective quote unquote. But it's like yeah, so I think like I don't know if I think about it. I don't really have to think about it, but I know that like as long as I'm not clashing into like other objects, I'm not like I guess like too close to objects more than like I need to be. I don't really care how I physically present if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you ever intentionally change the emotions of others?
Um no, not really to be honest because I think like I for the most part do say things that like I typically think are legitimately like true. Like am I going to say that I've never told a white lie just to make someone feel better? I'm probably not going to say that. I probably have because like I guess like it's just unwritten social agreement sometimes for like something that like you don't really like care about. So I think like people lie for stupid things and like yeah, it's fine. Like maybe like I can't think of like a specific instance, but I'm just going to use something which I believe is like along with it like there's like connotations like if someone asks me if like I like their shoes, and I think like there's obviously like a better design. I'm not gonna care. I'll just be like, okay, yeah, yeah, sure. Like your shoes are cool, man. They look nice on you because it's more like it's not really about me. I guess it's about them. So like maybe like to that extent, but I think it's like when it comes to things that like I don't know what I think is true, what I think like makes more sense when it comes to like I guess like I don't know. You can almost say political ideology, philosophical ideology, like something I guess of like more of those like undertones, then I think like I'm not afraid to contradict other people's morals. It's not necessarily in the sense that it's like I want to make them feel bad or I want to make them feel like a certain way. Because I think like I don't really consider that, because at least like from like my point of view, how they feel is gonna be like up to them, and like how they like interpret like my words, and they can either misinterpret it or like interpret it properly. There's nothing I can like really sort of like do about it. So like, in all honesty, I think it's kind of pointless to think about, because like you're gonna feel entitled to how you feel just as much as I'm gonna feel entitled to like what I feel and what I think is true and all that sort of stuff. So I feel like I don't need to influence somebody like it has like an agenda. I can only do my best to vouch for what I think is true. And if they happen to be swayed by it, if you consider that the same thing as like influencing them, then like, yeah, I guess. But it's like, I think if other people don't like me, or if like other people like disagree with me, I can deal with that. It's fine.
Okay. Next question. Yeah, my brain's taking a little bit of load here for some reason. How do you manage time?
Um, I don't really. I guess like in the most like simplistic way, like I can like set up alarms. I can try to have like a proper like sleep schedule and like whatnot. But I think like I've spent majority of my life with actually quite a lot of free time, that like long schedules, I don't really take them like that seriously, because like as long as it's something like super serious, I guess like I maybe like if I can assume serious in the sense of like if I have to be at the hospital to be performed open heart surgery on, then I think like, okay, I want to be there. I want to put the plans in place that I'll be there for that surgery, like hypothetically. But it's like, I think I'm more lax than some people. I'm more relaxed actually than like a lot of people, because it's like, even if I miss something, if there's a chance for it to be like rescheduled, like if it's something not that serious, even, or it's like if it can be like rescheduled, I don't see myself as like the kind of person to like freak out or like, oh, I need to be like on this time or like this and this and that, because it's like, I mean, if it can happen again, then I think like I kind of just rationalize it in the sense that like, why did it technically have to happen like on this particular day? Or it's like, um, I don't know. I'm not trying to bash somebody with like stereotypical like OCD or like something like that, but I think it's like, I don't know. I don't have to be structured. My attitude is more so just like, I'm still gonna say I told you so if the thing that like I claimed I was gonna do happened. Like let's say like I was like an immortal being. Even if it took 50 years from now, I still don't give a fuck what you're saying. Or like 500 years from now, and I actually did it because all I said was that I was gonna do it. And oh, so much time has passed where like I haven't, and you're thinking, oh, I forgot about it. Like nope, nope, I just finished it like 50 seconds ago. So I think you stress yourself out, or like a lot of people stress themselves out about that for like no fucking reason. And like in a way, I think like if a lot of the world was kind of like me, I'm not trying to make this sound narcissistic or anything like that. I think it's like, yeah, a lot of people would be a whole lot more relaxed about like a lot of things, because like I think people put unnecessary pressure on themselves to think that like, oh, society can't function if we're not like all on the same schedule. And it's just like, yeah, it's not necessarily wrong, but I think it's like, I think people should be using I guess feeling structured, even though I probably said like minutes ago that like I don't care about structure, or maybe that's what it sounds like a lot of people. I think it's like, to me it's more like I want to like structure, if it can make sense, the use of being structured and flexible into my life is more so how I'd put it.
Okay. 1 second, please. Okay. Would you consider yourself good at predicting the future?
Good at predicting the future. Um, yes and no. I feel like I'm copying out because I feel like I've been saying this for like so many things, but I think it's just like I don't spend that much time with like a lot of people, so I think like I might have like a little basis over what they might do based on like one or two or three like interactions like with them, because like I know that like I could meet somebody at a particularly bad time and maybe I don't know, they're annoyed, frustrated, but like maybe like for the most part they're actually this like super happy, easygoing sort of like person. So I think like I would like to think that like yeah, if I knew somebody consistently enough, I could most likely like determine what they may or like may not like do. But I think like if we're just talking about like people in general, I don't actually know a lot of people in general, like nor do I care to like get to know so many people. Not that I'm against knowing people, but it's like, you know, so I like along with like everything else, I think it just fits that like I make my best like in this case prediction towards what someone may or may not do, but like this is one of those things where you kind of have to figure out afterwards as like a byproduct, because it's like you can feel as confident as you want over what somebody might like do, but it's like unless you see the result that you know what you interpreted was to be true, then I don't know, you're like keeping track and it happens 9 times out of 10, or you have like some sort of like statistical analysis to like go by. Oh, I knew what was going to happen like 9 times out of 10, or like something like that, then all right, I think like I wanna congratulate you for like putting in the work. But I think like sometimes I actually wonder if like people say that just to like bias people's minds and seeing them as somebody like influential, because like you know there's like the appeal to like emotion fallacy, where a lot of people might like convince and like manipulate you to change your mind or like do a certain thing, because like they'll say something along the lines of like, oh, surely a person as intelligent as you would buy that it's obviously X, Y, and Z. And I think like a lot of people are impressed by like confidence and like showmanship. There are a lot of people, you know, like swayed by somebody like willing to like perform. And I think like a lot of these people that might say, oh, I'm a people person, or like, oh, it's like I can like read sort of like anybody. I don't necessarily believe that they have the skills to like actually do it. I think like, you know, they put on a good performance. Like that's what a good psychic does essentially, where it's like, oh, am I gonna like win a cool car in my future? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, yes, that's what my predictions, like, you know, from like pseudoscience this, like, you know, were like able to do. And sometimes I wonder, yeah, if like those people are just like working under like the same like mechanisms. Because like the moment I hear someone say that, or at least like, or like, you know, especially if they're like, you know, they're gonna say that towards like me or something, then I'm low key already suspicious like of that person. So I guess in a way I don't want to assume that about myself, that like okay, I'm almost such a foresight human being.
Mm-hmm. I think we can go ahead and move on. By the way, this is not an Enneagram typing, but you have a strong 5. Don't know if it's your core type. Not qualified for that quite yet. I'm working on it. But you have a
Hmm.
strong 5.
I'll keep it in mind.
We're gonna move on. Is your room clean?
For me it's fine. Other people might like disagree. Like I have like stuff on the floor and like stuff like that, and it's like I know that like maybe some people would prefer to keep things in a more like layered out sort of like foundation, so like it doesn't really bother me. I don't think my room's dirty, but like maybe I could see certain personalities, certain kinds of people calling it disorganized, sure.
Okay. Do you find it easy to relax?
Uh Maybe physically, yeah, because like I probably look like a sloth to like a lot of people like in general, because I'm just like oof moping around. I don't really care about like the physical space unless it's not getting me uncomfortable with like other things around me or like whatever. But it's like I would say my mind is actually pretty super fucking active. Like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but I guess like I akin to the definition of relaxed in the sense that like okay, I'm here, not necessarily present, but it's uh like I'm not tweaking or something like oh, like nervous of like every single like sort of like thing like around me, but it's just like sometimes I wish I didn't have to think about things too much, question, ponder, like that would be nice, but like technically I know that's just part of me, so I still am relaxed in that sense. You
Okay. We've reached the end,
know? All right.
so I'm gonna go ahead and probably take it could take up to a half hour to explain everything that I just wrote down. Explain your responses
All
to.
right.
Um, we're gonna start with three of the rain and dichotomies. Then we're gonna move on to the quadra, and then the elements and their blockings, and finally we're gonna land on DC and H. I do have a DC and H subtype selected for you.
All right.
Okay, so we're gonna start with rational versus irrational. So rational types are going to be rigid people who, when they make decisions, they tend to see it through or stick to it. They're people who don't change their minds, and I think I just said. But they're also people who focus a lot on themselves within certain systems or structures. Um, and then you have maybe that's too general of a statement. Scratch that last part. And then you have the irrationals, and so the rationals are the J, irrationals are the P. So the irrationals um, are going to be open ended and go with the flow. They're going to be uh, the wait and see type of people, and they're also going to be fluid in comparison to rigid. Um, I believe that you're irrational, mostly because you don't really commit to a lot. It seems like people, ideas, goals, all sorts of these things seem to be more or less bargaining chips, and so you're not you're not anchored to that. And I think instead you're kind of exploring, and you're just kind of going through everything. And
Yeah,
so
there are like options everywhere essentially. Yeah.
yeah, that it's either this or that. And so it's like you don't really select a path, and you're constantly just like seeing how it all unfolds. And so I definitely think that it's a really good example of your rationality. Even and I know that's an unfortunate term, isn't it? It has a connotation, but it can be a good thing. I mean, honestly, as a rational type myself, I get bound up on things. I'm very rigid and structured and conscientious and all sorts of things that can be detriment at times. So, different strokes for different folks. We're gonna move on. Um, Now we have process result. This is not anything to do with the elements. This is things to do with the benefit rings. So it's like groups of people. Process people are going to be thorough people that read all the way through the chapter. They want to have everything that they're going to need by when they're starting to do something. They're also going to say, well, of course we got the right result because we followed the right process. Result people, on the contrary, are troubleshooters. They tend to skim through the chapter. They tend to start with the mistakes and work backwards, or start with the goals and work backwards. They're people who are just going to get started, and then things will come together as they do it. I think your process, mostly because of the thoroughness at which you answered everything, you want to have no stone left unturned. Do you find that whenever you learn about things, you tend to learn about them through like uh, entirely, if that makes sense?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Which is kind of which is like why I like Wikipedia, because like like when they like reference like a lot of things, you can like click to learn more about that, and just like excuse me, it can almost be like never ending, and you can almost see how like everything can be interconnected, quote unquote, or like I guess like how it all fits in a bigger grand scheme of things. Yeah.
Yeah, that was super processed. That was the most processed thing anyone's ever told me. Um, all right. So now we're gonna move on to static versus dynamic. So
Mhm.
static types are going to be people who are like taking one frame and expounding on it to perfection. So they want to know like basically completely and like distill things down to their finer points. So they tend to have ideas about things that are like you could say perhaps replicable or things that they tend to stick to. Mostly because whenever they change their mind on something, what that was
Mhm.
is now completely different. When they're categorizing things, those are two separate things. These
Uh,
people also tend to be more mobile, and so this mobility tends to be how they learn because they go from one thing to the next. They go from one
yeah.
situation to the next. Um,
Mhm.
on the contrary, you have dynamics, and so dynamics, instead of just like having that understanding of it at this fundamental level, see I should say the statics focus on space, the dynamics focus on time. The dynamics
Mhm.
see how it's all bending together, how it's all interrelated, how everything is always in a state of change or flux.
Mhm.
And they tend to be more focused on the way that they gather information. So instead of it just
Mhm.
kind of being like this changing situations or going from circumstance to circumstance, they tend to focus in on things whenever they need to get things accomplished or done. Um,
Mhm.
I think that you're very clearly static. I think
Mhm.
mostly because you've given me a lot of examples of axioms that you kind of use to understand the world. And I definitely think that you're really focused on understanding things. I mean, in the beginning, you kind of use the terms lazy and directionless. Um,
Mhm.
even though that's not necessarily pertaining to you, so to speak. I think the
Mhm.
fact that it's kind of like forefront in your mind is kind of indicating somewhat of what I call dynamic problems. And dynamic problems are somebody who really
Uh,
can't manage time, and that's something that you're kind of saying. And you're not very interested in managing time either. It seems like, but we'll get into the details here in a second.
all
Um,
right. All right.
so now we're going to talk about the quadra. I
Mhm.
usually use the dictator question to kind of suss this one out. But
Mhm.
honestly, I found that you were wondering about like the obligations that you had, about how you relate to the people, and you didn't really commit to anything. Um, I kind of see a lot of alpha quadra in you
Ooh.
because the alpha is really in opposition to the gamma, and so it's like,
I'm an alpha male.
yep, everyone makes that joke, man. Everybody. Um,
Yeah.
so, it, yeah, and then the alpha males or betas. It's funny. Um, but yeah, so um, you were very critical of the gamma, which is something I kind of expect. And we're gonna talk about that when we talk about your super ego blocking, because there's
All
a
right. Yeah.
great example of super ego gamma. It's hilarious. Um, but yeah, I definitely see a lot of like I definitely see. So it's like with the alpha quadra, is they're usually going to generally be considerate or nice, because they're worried about
Mhm.
like the state and condition of the atmosphere of things. They don't really want to disturb things because then if you disturb things, then you can't speak freely. And so the alphas
Yeah.
like to be experimental. They like to consider new things. They don't like to pigeonhole themselves, and so they don't want harsh words or language getting in the way of humor or exploration. And I definitely
Yeah. Like freedom of speech. Yeah. Like is important. For example.
yes, yeah. I definitely think that that's like Alpha Quadra is probably going to be a big proponent of things such as freedom of speech,
Mhm.
because they're judicious, and so judicious people on the perceiving end are very open ended. So this is talking about SINE people who are on that axis in general. Tend to be
Mhm.
people who always want more information. They tend not to see themselves as the final authority on things, and more so
Mhm.
connectors of information than arbiters of the truth. Um, so I think Alpha Quadrant makes a lot of sense for you. We're gonna move on now to the blockings. So this is not the way that's listed in Model A. In fact, this is nearly upside down. I do that for dramatic reasons, for the dramatic flair. We're gonna start with high dimensionality, unvalued, and then move to low dimensionality, unvalued. Dimensionality refers to like resolution or strength. And then we're gonna
Yeah.
start, I mean, no, then we're gonna move over to the valued and repeat the process. Um, First blocking is the id blocking. Elements contained within the id blocking are going to be your strong but unvalued. These are going to be things that you're going to be good at, but that you're also going to be dismissive of because you have other
Mhm.
preferences, other things that you find more interesting. So, despite you being good at these, they kind of fall to least concern in certain situations. Um,
Yeah.
we're going to start first with demonstrative, which is four-dimensional, unvalued. So with a demonstrative, it's a very strong element that tends to proliferate throughout the personality of the person, but it's never quite
Mhm.
point source. You can never really quite say, "Oh, there it is," because the person's there's always other things in the way that they're more interested in, despite
Yeah.
them being a very good representative of this element themselves. Um,
Mhm.
for your demonstrative, I have TE selected, extroverted logic. So you were saying you don't really take things seriously in my notes here, which is generally what you were saying throughout the entire typing session. You're
Yeah.
yeah you're talking about like actions can be formed in a certain path for you. So it's like you kind of want to walk in certain directions and do certain things to get certain results. Um, you're also saying that 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 without reason you really can't be moved, and so you focus on the usefulness. And so there's a great
Mhm.
example. I mean, there's a little bit of TI in there, of course, because the TI
Mhm.
is valued automatically if the TE is unvalued. But
Mhm.
the focus on the usefulness is really an expression of you seeing the utility of the objects. So TE,
The resources, yeah.
yeah, so TE is really focused on what it's for, where TI is really
Mhm.
more focused on what it is. And so you're kind of
Mhm.
demonstrating that you can do both. That you're really not super adverse to TE. In fact, it seems like that you can use it quite well from the way that you answered it. But it doesn't seem to be something that you're actively valuing because you don't really take it seriously. I mean, especially with its blocking
Mhm.
NI, which is really selecting a path. And the TE is manifesting the path. These seem to be things you're not taking very seriously, and so that's kind of a good example. We're gonna move on to the next, which is the ignoring. The ignoring, which is blocked with a demonstrative, is rigid in comparison. Um, it also tends to be more like a light switch, on or off, something that you can do very well for a short period of time before you get bored and you wander off to do something more important. Um, I believe that this one for you is your NI. So NI in ignoring tends to be someone who can see the end of a certain thing, can see that things will ultimately end in one path or trajectory, but they'll ultimately refuse to take that path because they'll say there's just too many outcomes, there's too many things to explore, all of them are intriguing, so I really don't want
Yeah,
to.
no, it's like it can't be that simple, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it can't be that simple that it's just one thing. Um, I think a great example of your NI being unvalued is so you externalize time management, and so instead of the time management being like this sort of rhythm that you feel inside of you, which I feel is something that NI is very much known for, especially NI when blocked with TE, tends to be somebody who regiments themselves automatically, as someone whose structures become routines and the routines become unconscious. Um, but you're externalizing it. You were talking about setting alarms and other things. Um, you're also saying that you kind of um, like you kind of alternate between structure and fluidity. So this is going to be that it's like you naturally want to keep your efforts open ended. and these things,
Mm.
which is another thing. Um, you also talked a little bit about predicting the behaviors of people, but it was like kind of elaborative, and I don't think I really got like a good example of like where it tied back directly to the NI. But I think that this is kind of like NI makes sense in the position it is, even if I don't really have like a point source or a smoking gun like I sometimes get
Mhm.
with one of these typing sessions. I think NI makes more than enough sense in the ignoring position. Um, so next we're going to move on to the super ego blocking. And so this is where I'm going to
Mhm.
explain the gamma stuff, even though that the other blocking can be considered gamma as well. Um, so with the superego, these are going to be weak and unvalued. These are going to be things that you
Mhm.
don't really focus on or care about, but you can ultimately see the flaws in. Since, but as also inbound with that means you can't see the virtues because it's so low resolution, but you can easily see the flaws. But the irony is, people can also see the same for you for these elements. And so you'll hear usually people be critical about these or be criticized for these within the typing session. And you really did a lot, actually. Very interesting. So we're going to start with the role. The role is rigid in comparison to its blocking, the polar. The role is two-dimensional, unvalued. It is vocational. It is a mask that you slip on when in service of the ego, which we're going to talk about next. So it is
Mhm.
always done for those fundamental reasons, but can appear more often than the ignoring. Um, so the role that I have selected for you is SE. Um,
Uh-huh.
People who have SE role are not extremely adverse to conflict, but will tend to use words instead. They will tend to be able to argue their way out of things or to talk their way out of things. Um, they can be kind of tricksters in that sense. But the, I'm kind of seeing that your excuse me. I'm kind of seeing that your SE is in the super ego. Mostly because it's like agree to disagree. So it's like you're not wanting to force people to believe what you believe, and you're just fine
Mhm.
with having boundaries. And so I think that the SE in the role is the fact that you're at least capable of deciphering those boundaries pretty easily, and then boundaries aren't difficult because people with SE polar are rational types, and so it's
Mhm.
difficult for them to refine that. They seem to be relatively automatic for you, so I don't think that this is your polar. Um,
Mhm.
you're, you're cautious of overly friendly people, which is a very common trait associated with SE. I think that your SE might be
Mhm.
boosted by your subtype, by the way. But oh yeah, here's a great example. Why I think that you have low resolution, unvalued SE. You wouldn't steal candy. Um, and I know that that might sound bullshit, right? Because you can have an LSI, you can have TISE, and they're still capable of sussing out the consequences, so they're not going to steal the candy. But I think that just that little example, um, is one little data point, not the data point,
Mhm.
but one little data point that it's like you're not going to leverage the environment to get what you want. Um, you're not going to leverage other people to get what you want. You're going to recognize boundaries. You're going to recognize their ability to leverage you, and so therefore you need to unplug, and why you're also critical of when people force each other. Um, and we're going to explain this with the polar next. Um, so I definitely think your role is super ego. Now we're going to move on to the polar. The polar, vulnerable, point of least resistance, is this
Mhm.
watery, weak element that tends to be that tends to be something that the person can learn a lot about, but ultimately never uses. I believe that this is your polar. Uh, I mean that Fi is your polar, and so
Mhm.
what you find with Fi in this position, this is somebody who doesn't really recognize the weight behind their words. They're people who ignore processing their own emotions. They're people who might use very logical reason and these things to form their code of conduct. Even though that ultimately judicious polar Fi people tend not to be very aggressive. even though that they're not that they don't really recognize the weight of their words, they don't seem to ever really intentionally hurt people, and they kind of have, unless it's for trolling sake, which does happen a lot with F bipolar. F bipolar people do like to troll. Um, but the reason I think it's super ego for you is because you're just talking about people who force their morals on other people. So this is the SEFI, that blocking. You're completely critical of it. You refer to it as being like high school. Where it's like somebody who is SEFI might say that conflict is natural and you need to stand up for what you believe. You tell them that they're high schoolers, that they're immature because they believe that other people need to think like them. Um, yeah, I definitely think that it's a really great example of SEFI and the positions that they're at. Honestly, very, very good. I mean, it's like, how do you respond to the emotions of others? Do those emotions matter or not? Um, it's like, when I'm talking about your morals, you're talking about psychopaths, which is super interesting because you're like, can you blame the psychopath for being a psychopath? No. Um, and there's
Yeah,
just
you can, yeah.
yeah, I think that's so funny. I love it. I love the open-mindedness for one, but I still think it's a great example of FI polar, because FI is very much smoothing the rough edges of things. It's making things through conscientiousness more rounded and palatable. FI is the person uh, asking people to be polite, asking people to make up for their mistakes, asking for people to apologize. That's typically what you find. The FE person is making the jokes at the expense of another person, and the FI user steps in to ask him to please be respectful. Um, so I definitely think that you're FI polar. Um, Mostly because it's just that where is the processing of your own emotions? There is no processing of your own emotions. In fact, you've made a philosophic argument against processing your own emotions. Um, they're,
I can't wait to like listen to it back.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's very interesting. I took very good notes this time. This is easy to read. Um, hmm. All right. So now we are going to move on to the ego blocking. The ego blocking is your home, your identity. It's who you. I guess I shouldn't say home. It's what you represent, what others ask of you, and what you're good at. Um, we're gonna start with the base, which is four-dimensional valued. The base is inescapable. It is who you are. It is also what you're quite very good at. You can be so good at this, you can recognize imbalances in your life with it. You can you can see when it's not being used correctly. Um, I believe that your base is any, and I think mostly the entire time you're weighing different perspectives. You're looking down different avenues. You're making complex arguments which nullify selecting certain paths or modes of thinking. I think you really have like just like 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 the problem that you're having is like understanding the absurdity of life's entropy. I mean, it's very it's very like philosophical. Most of the things that you were saying is very philosophical, and I think that really correlates strongly with intuition. Even though I'd say not all philosophy is intuition, and I would say that there's some very good philosophies that are sensing or ethical or otherwise. Um, but it's just the fact that you were just so open ended with things. You're open to ideas, but you don't need to pass judgment on them. That's one of the reasons why I think you're irrational. It's because
Yeah, there.
you can listen. You can listen without passing judgment. And that
Yeah,
may be
the considerations, yeah. That's what I was gonna say.
yeah. So it's like there might be the benefit of the FI polar, that it's like I can listen without having to stamp my opinion upon it, to change it with my with who I am. And it's like, no, you don't even need to agree to an idea to hear it out. Very accepting of paradox. Um, you speak in paradox most of the time, and I find that paradox is maybe not solely any, but I find strongly correlated with any. Your understanding of paradoxes to be strongly correlated with any. So I think it's definitely good examples of any, just all over the place, just positive, optimistic any, just taking it all
And
in.
then you,
Except for the fact that you find travel unnecessary. I find some any, especially strong any, people do like to travel. But here you are saying that it's a bit unnecessary.
I mean, it's the physical aspect of it, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Interesting, interesting. Well, that could make sense, of course, with the position of the sensing. Of course, it's an opposition. Not opposition. It's in tandem, but it's at the other end of the pole, I would say. Um, so now we're going to move on to your creative. The creative is the alternate hand to the dominant, constantly reassessing and reforming the ideas coming down from the base to make it more nuanced and palatable. If the base is who you are, the creative is what you bring to the party, what you externalize. I definitely see that as TI. So I think I've got wonderful examples of TI here. When I'm asking you what is truth, you said logical consistency. And then you were kind of questioning about the phrase logical consistency. I used to ask that as a question. Do you consider yourself to be logically consistent? Well, you brought that up without me even having to ask that question. Because TI is consistency. It is information distilled down to such a fine point that it can be an inarguable law or principle to be leveraged. I definitely see that mode of thought. Um, like, like you're saying things like there is no truth. Yeah, but it ultimately is that you're applying some TI label across all these different dimensions. That you're understanding things by this fundamental understanding. It's like when I'm asking you about do emotions matter? How do you respond to emotions? You're saying do they matter or not? So you're making this TI categorization. Is this correct or is this incorrect? Which I found to be very interesting. Also, another great example of TI. I also find that TI is also correlated to analysis paralysis or the refinement of things. Spending a lot of time meditating over specific pieces of information. So I think that makes a lot of sense. You're also saying a lot more rules here. You said you aspire to consistency, which is their TI valuing, of course, even in low dimension. That you find that type of train of thought. You say that the only constant is change is another thing I have here on my note. There's another one of those TI axioms that you're putting forth. Yeah. I mean, that's so. And you're saying that people are only consistent in what comforts them, and that's very existential. That's very interesting. So I definitely think that your TI is creative, because you're representing good use of your TI. Sometimes you'll see that the TI might hide away a little bit, and sometimes the mobilizing might take the center stage. But I think definitely that your TI is very visible, very very visible.
right,
Um,
yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the super id. The super id are going to be your weak but valued. So, I forgot to mention the base is rigid in comparison to the creative. The mobilizing is rigid in comparison to its blocking. The suggestive. So the mobilizing is an element of being like a neophyte, of being new, of being enthusiastic, but yet not super nuanced. This tends to be the social integration element. So it tends to be when you're nuanced with this. This is how you kind of ingratiate yourself upon other people. I think I have good examples of how it works of SI. Honestly, I want somebody to ask me about that so I can explain it all one day. But I I definitely think that your mobilizing is FE. Um, you didn't talk a super lot about your FE, but of course your FE is more nuanced than your sensory, which you seem to talk about even less. Um, so you're talking about being a very expressive person, or being able to people can read your expressions easily because you wear them on your face. You say that you can use white lies and you could make reasons for why you wouldn't tell the truth, even though you find maybe such things to be distasteful, and that you want to vouch for the truth. And so there's the TI coming forth, where it's like, I want to be consistent in my knowledge, and I want my knowledge to be correct. You'll find that with TI based people, that incorrectness can come with shame. I'm not sure so much. Would you say that you feel shame when you're incorrect?
Um, I don't know if it's shame, but it's certainly disappointing. I would say, yeah.
Maybe that's more like a universal thing. But I know, especially for TI people, being incorrect might be particularly bitter because they spend so much time trying to find what's true or not.
So yeah, it's like why didn't I know better, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm seeing here like the FE is kind of there to be wielded. Definitely the mobilizing is an element that's not taken very seriously. It's used a lot, but not taken seriously. Unlike the blocking, which is the suggestive, which we're going to move on to. Suggestive is your one-dimensional valued element. It is weak and watery, much like the polar. What the primary difference is that the suggestive is going to be what this person is painstakingly weaving together throughout their entire life. It's going to be what this person doesn't have by themselves, and so they're going to appreciate people who can provide this for them. This is also unlike the mobilizing, which is the balancing. The suggestive is the seeking. It's what you're looking for. Um, I believe that your suggestive is SI, and so I think you not being very aware of sensory states makes a lot of sense. You can find that people with suggestive sensory in general can ignore their affairs when getting sucked into projects to take all their mental energy. You were you're bringing up SI ways of managing time, by setting alarms and such, as I said earlier. You're not super fussy about the state and condition of your room. You were referencing things on the floor. Sometimes you can find when people are pointing out direct things in their room. This can be SI. Sometimes it can be correlated with high sensory in general. But I always find particularly SI users might recant what's around them, or might be very specific about the objects nearby, because they're very attuned to everything within the sensory field, because it's what
Yeah,
it is.
it's familiar. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You're saying neat but disorganized, or that's what I have written down. That's not exactly what you said. Um, you're also saying that relaxing physically is easy, even though you tend to be in your head a lot. And so I think that's the good example of the suggestive being low. If the sensory being in a suggestive position. Um, you don't care about your physical space unless it's uncomfortable. And so there it is where it's like the SI is focused on comfort and utility and all these things like the sensual nature. And so it's only until these things begin to irritate you do they come out to talk to you. And so there's the example of the valued, but the lack of dimensionality, the lack of resolution. All right, so in Model A, I am typing you ILE, NETI. So now we're going to move on to the subtype.
All right.
I think I'm just going to read off a couple paragraphs instead of going through the dichotomies, honestly. Um, I can send you some information if you'd like to read it.
Let's go. Yeah.
Prototype. Eccentric inventor, life hacker. Not just a thinker, he works with aspirations for the future. He is interested in the new, mysterious, or just poorly understood phenomena. His inventive talent is revealed in unusual projects or bold technical solutions. He willingly attracts people to new ventures and prefers to do what is interesting rather than what is profitable. distracted by interesting details. He does not have time to execute major projects by deadline. Therefore, his work is periodically rushed to compensate for missed opportunities. He cannot tolerate strict regulations and monotone routine work. He defies authoritarian pressure. In circumstances, he exacerbates the conflict. He cannot live in a sedate and measured life, as ordinary people with routines do. He is quite scattered, leaving things where they were last used. By regularly switching to something new, he forgets what he was doing at the moment. Therefore, maintaining constant order with personal matters is difficult. Does that make sense?
Like commitment,
Yeah,
is a
exactly.
pretty. It feels, yeah, it feels suffocating.
Yes, and so this is precisely because it's the because the creative subtype is an initiator subtype, and so it is
Yeah.
it's a person who starts but is not as good at finishing, and so you can see kind of like the irrational rational dichotomy playing out in kind of a smaller scale, with the DCNH.
Oh yeah, yeah. I feel that because I think like when an idea shoots out, it's only appealing like as it comes out, and then it kind of like wears itself out if you spend too much time with it.
Yes, yeah, there's the initiating. That's why I don't think you're normalizing, even though I was seeing a lot of good examples of TI. I think that you're definitely creative, because the normalizing subtype would be much more akin to finishing the projects. Um, you there's also like there's contacting distancing. The contacting, I don't know. You have some five-ish characteristics, and that's where even though that you are technically truly extroverted, you seem to have some characteristics where you tend not to be bothered by people that much. And this is typically something that you're going to see with the NT club a lot.
Mhm.
LIEs, for example, are just always crazily typed. They can be typed as INTJ. They can be typed
Mhm.
as as LSI. Mostly because the LIE, so this is TENI, is just not really that interested in people. And so I think that,
Mhm.
that explains, the five-ish behaviors. That explains the withdrawn thinker, and these things. Despite many of them being truly extroverted, you just don't seem to have many extroverted behaviors, and so the contacting almost doesn't seem that I have really good examples of it. Um, but
Mhm.
then, what is the last one? There's contacting term, contacting distancing. Oh, ignoring something. Yeah, so the ignorers, and I think that this is because creative is also ignoring, and then there's the fact that you really don't pay attention or put that much consideration into people. I think that definitely makes a lot of sense for ignoring because it's like the static subtype, and so it's like you're focused on the space rather than the time. You're not focused on how it's all tied together. And so I think that this kind of like ignorance of people's emotional states and kind of fixation and focusing on your own thoughts. You're open minded and you entertain these thoughts, but are you super responsive to them? No. I find that with a lot of creative subtypes that they tend to recontextualize things a lot and almost constantly instead of really focusing on what the other person is necessarily trying to communicate. Even though I understand, I'm an initiator. I'm not an initiator. I am a wait no yes I am an initiator and I am a process type, much like yourself. Um, but
Yeah.
it's difficult for me, I think, to be very specific and precise in my descriptions of things. I tend to be very general and elaborative, and I find that that might be part of the reason why creative subtypes are often like, I can't focus on what you're saying. But they tend to understand what I'm saying, when they do listen. Um, so the final
Mhm.
typing is going to be ILE creative. So this is basically like the any subtype of the ILE. Is there anything you'd like to tell me?
Um, I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Well, just send me your email and then I'll email you the video. I will also send you some resources if you'd like.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're all done.
Yes.